If you are interested in purchasing a flashlight, then understanding the terminology will help you make the right choice, and this video is for you. Or even if you are just interested in understanding more about today's flashlights, then this is also for you. For everyone else, you might want to skip this one because we are going to flashlight school.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Hi, my name is Jonathan. Welcome back to the channel. This video is all about flashlights, or as we say over here, torches. And I'm going to be explaining the features that you'll find on most flashlights today, and also run through some of the technology that I think will really help you when it comes to choosing a flashlight. Okay, first we have luminous flux, which is measured in lumens, and that is the total light output of a given light. And that's what you often see first when you're looking at the specification of a flashlight, how many lumens it has. The reflector in a flashlight, and in some cases a lens, focuses and directs the light in a certain way. So that might be, for example, a floodlight or a beam. And that relates to the intensity of a light. And that intensity in a particular direction is referred to as luminous intensity and measured in candela, sometimes called candle power. So the candela rating gives you a measure of the beam intensity. This means you can have a lower power flashlight, i.e. less lumens, which can have a higher intensity than a higher powered flashlight when direction is factored in. Think of it like a hose pipe. The same amount of water pressure can cover a wide area with a spray head, much like a floodlight, or a much greater distance over a smaller area with a narrow jet, like a flashlight beam. And this is where the range or light throw comes in. Okay, let's look at these two flashlights as an example. This one has a power output of 2000 lumens and this one has a power output of 3100 lumens. So this flashlight is technically more powerful. But let's have a look at the candela output and it paints a different picture. The candela rating on this more powerful flashlight is 36,100 candela, whereas on this one, which is 2/3 of the output power, is 250,000 candela. That is 7 times more. And don't forget, candela is luminous intensity, so the lower power flashlight has more intensity. And you can see why when you compare the reflectors on both flashlights. This one here with the higher luminous intensity has a very deep reflector and a wider reflector, and that focuses the beam in a much more narrow pattern, and therefore more of the light output is directed in a tighter beam. The LED on this smaller but more powerful flashlight is not as recessed and the reflector is not as wide, and that results in more of a spread of light. So more light output but spread much wider and therefore less luminous intensity. The design of this flashlight is all about producing a tight beam and therefore longer range. This one is a compromise between beam and flood. And we can see that if we look at the quoted range. The quoted range of this flashlight here is 1,000 meters. And the quoted range of this flashlight here is 380 meters. So although it's got higher power, it's got a shorter range, but more of a flood. And this one has lower power, but a much greater range, 3 times greater in fact, and a much narrower light beam. This flashlight here, which is the Fenix TK16 version 2, is a tactical flashlight. Part of that remit is to create a blinding level of light over a broader area in case you want to disorientate an opponent, say, and a tight focus beam would be a disadvantage because there is a good chance you won't be able to get it on target in a challenging situation. Each flashlight is designed around a specific purpose, and it's up to you to decide what fits your specific use case. In short, if you want a spotlight or a long range light, then the candela rating will be a much better measure for comparison than the lumen rating. And a single LED and a bigger reflector will generally be better for a longer range spotlight than a multi-array flashlight such as the one we have here, or one with smaller reflectors, which will generally result in more of a floodlight. And now we get into the measurement of lux, which is the amount of light hitting a surface. And that's measured with a light meter. And the ANSI FL1 standard states that the maximum range of a light is a measure of the distance from the light when the surface light level drops to 0.25 of a lux. That's a quarter of a lux, which is a super gloomy light level. In fact, it's about the same as moonlight. So, for example, if your flashlight has a quoted range of 500 meters, don't expect to be able to spot a black cat at night half a kilometer away in what will effectively be moonlight brightness levels. And don't forget that the reflected light has to then travel back to your eyes 500 meters away, and that any dust or weather getting in the way in both directions will degrade the effective range even more. In fact, some people say that you should reduce the quoted range by a factor of 4 to get a meaningful range for practical use. So that 500 meter range flashlight actually has a practical range of 125 meters. Our perception of brightness is also worth mentioning. A light which has double the output will not actually appear as twice as bright because our perception of light is non-linear. Roughly, for a light to appear twice as bright, it needs to be 4 times the intensity. So, when you're buying a flashlight, you might think one with a few more lumens will be a better light, when in fact it's unlikely to translate to a large visible difference in the brightness. And there are likely to be much more important factors to consider, like the runtime, candela rating, beam pattern, ease of operation, etc. And talking about runtime, this is also addressed in the FL1 standard. Runtime is the time taken from 30 seconds after switch on until the light output reaches 10% of the initial measurement. In some flashlights, the light output decreases steadily over time, but in today's LED lights, we more often see that the light is maintained at a steady level for the majority of the remaining time, except in very high brightness modes. In very high brightness modes, often referred to as turbo, it's a bit different as the intensity often drops after a relatively short period of time. This owes generally to protect the electronics from being damaged by overheating, as the flashlight can heat up very rapidly to very high temperatures at those high brightness levels. However, once it has cooled to a predetermined level, the turbo mode can be engaged again. But be aware that the overall runtime can be significantly reduced with constant use of turbo. This can usually be seen on the runtime charts that come with most flashlights. Often the turbo runtime shows the number of minutes or seconds before the intensity will drop down, and then the remaining time shown is at that reduced intensity. This is the chart for the Imalent MS06 and shows that the turbo mode, which is 25,000 lumens, which is a lot, will only run for 70 seconds before it drops down to 4,000 lumens. So that is quite a big drop in power, but then it will run at that reduced rate for 2 hours. Even the high brightness mode, which is the next one down from turbo, which is 9,000 lumens, can only be maintained for 2 minutes before a heat-induced drop down against 4,000 lumens. And that 4,000 lumens mode can be maintained without a further heat-induced drop down. Sometimes though it's less clear. And on this Fenix here, the chart, when you look at the turbo mode, has a small asterisk next to it. And that then links to some small print. And that says, this measurement includes output at reduced levels, which are activated when the flashlight reaches a temperature of 60 degrees. All we really know from that statement, though, is that it will drop down at some point when it gets hot being 60 degrees, but we don't exactly know when, although experience tells us it will be inside a couple of minutes. To be fair though, it's probably a more accurate statement because the outside temperature will have a noticeable effect on the heat buildup. For example, if you're in the Arctic at minus 60 degrees, that's going to be very different to say if you're wandering around in the Amazon at 40 degrees. And therefore the time taken for the flashlight to drop down will vary to some extent depending on that external temperature. So obviously form factor will form an important part of the decision making process. Are you looking for a compact tactical light? Do you need to keep your hands free and therefore should be looking at a headlight? Are you looking for something that you can use as a spotlight, a powerful floodlight maybe for search and rescue, or something really compact that will fit in your pocket for everyday carry? Another feature worth considering is Firefly mode, sometimes referred to as moonlight mode, and that is a really low light level of illumination, often just 1 lumen, and that's designed to allow you to have a level of light without disturbing anybody around you, and also it will preserve battery life. With some flashlights you can have weeks if not months of continuous use on Firefly mode, so it's a really useful mode to have, particularly if you are really short of battery life and you still want some level of illumination. With the exception of some tactical flashlights which have a very firm tail switch, often you will find a lockout mode on a flashlight, and that is to stop the flashlight from being accidentally activated when it's in, say, an item of luggage being knocked about. So that's a useful feature to have. If you don't have that, or you want to be extra secure, quite often you can just unscrew the tail cap on a flashlight by a quarter of a turn, and that will completely disable most flashlights. Sometimes you'll find, particularly if you've got a tactical flashlight, that'll have an easy access strobe function, and that is to be used as a form of self-defense to disorientate, say, an attacker, and that is a useful feature to have depending on your use case. Some flashlights have a strobe beacon that flashes a really intense light for very short bursts, and that is to attract attention, so that is a safety feature. Some lights have an SOS mode which flashes SOS in Morse code. I don't know how genuinely useful that is. I guess you've got to be in fairly desperate circumstances to see that as a really important feature. Some flashlights, particularly headlights, have a red light built in, and that can be at different intensities, and usually you can get it to flash as well. Particularly useful for maintaining night vision if you are moving around at night, or as a safety aid. So really useful to have, particularly on a headlight. Also, you might hear about warm light or cool light, and that relates to the color temperature of the light, which is measured in Kelvin. And if you move towards the 4000 Kelvin range, the light is warm. That means more orange. And as you move into the 6000s, you're getting more around natural daylight, or a cooler light, or a blue light. Pretty much all flashlights have different light levels you can choose from, and you can just step through to get the light level you want. A couple of more things worth knowing. One is the IPX rating, which is how protected the flashlight is against water ingress. And I will personally avoid anything below IPX4, which means it is splash proof. IPX5 means it is water resistant against low pressure jets. IPX6 is high pressure jets. It gets more interesting at IPX7 because everything IPX7 and above is classed as waterproof rather than water resistant. And in the case of IPX7, it can be submerged to a depth of 1 meter for 30 minutes, and IPX8 increases that to 2 meters for 30 minutes. If you see IP rating instead of IPX, you've got an extra bit of information there because there's two numbers. The first number relates to how dustproof it is, and the second number is the waterproofing as we've already described. Generally though, you only see the waterproofing rating because if it's waterproof or water resistant, then generally by definition it is dustproof as well. And then there's impact resistance, that is quoted as a drop distance, and that is dropping the flashlight onto cured concrete from that distance 6 times in succession at different angles. That generally matches the sides of a cube. And after that experience, the flashlight shouldn't have suffered any material damage or loss of function. When it comes to batteries, rechargeable batteries have higher power densities than disposable batteries, so more power for longer. But I guess the drawback is you can't nip out to the shops to buy replacements if you unexpectedly run out of power, always assuming there are shops around. Bigger batteries generally give longer run times. I've got some common sizes here. That's a 16340, 18650 and 21700. These are usually lithium ion, but there are some flashlights that use lithium polymer. Lithium polymer is a little bit more lightweight. They are generally in flashlights that do not have replaceable batteries like the one I have here. USB-C charging is preferred over micro USB. It's newer, it's more reliable, it can be charged faster, and you don't have to worry about getting the plug the right way round. When it comes to charging, sometimes the battery has the charging socket built into it, and that has a benefit in terms of reliability, because if you get a fault with that connection, then you simply replace the battery, worst case, rather than the flashlight itself. It's also less prone to damage because that socket is now hidden away inside the flashlight and less prone to dust and water ingress. The benefit of having a socket on the flashlight, though, is it is more convenient because you can simply plug in to charge without having to take the battery out the flashlight. And also in some cases, some flashlights can be plugged into a power bank and they can be used whilst they are charging. So for those situations, that can be a benefit as well. Some suppliers have their own charging connectors. These two here have their own bespoke magnetically attached charging leads, and that's good for convenience, but it can be a challenge if it gets lost or broken or you leave it behind. So for me, I generally prefer to use standard USB connectors, as I always carry those anyway. It's also worth pointing out that most manufacturers don't supply a charger. These charge via USB generally, and we usually have plenty of those kicking around already, but they do supply a charging lead. Well, if you've got this far, then hopefully it's been useful, and you might also be interested in some specific flashlight reviews, in which case just click on this link here. Thank you as always for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.